They say the eyes can deceive, but the heart always knows the truth, if only we listen. When Nkosi returned from war, he carried dreams of love, but what he found shattered his soul. There, in the dim glow of his own home, stood his wife Zola beside another man. In that moment, rage spoke louder than reason. But in every village there is a story, where what is seen is not what is true. If you believe love should never be judged too quickly, stay with us. They say a man who leaves his home in search of fortune carries not only his dreams but also the fragile thread of those who wait for him. In a quiet village, on the outskirts of Johannesburg, where red dust clung to bare feet and the wind whispered stories through acacia trees, Nkosi had once lived a simple life. His home was small, its roof patched with care. But within those walls lived laughter, warmth, and the gentle voice of his wife, Zola. Before the war, Nkosi was not a man of wealth. He tilled the land with tired hands and sold what little harvest he could gather at the market. Some days there was food, other days there were only promises. Yet through it all, Zola stood beside him, her eyes soft with hope, her spirit unbroken. "My husband," she would say, placing her hand over his, "we may not have much, but we have each other, and that is enough." But Nkosi was a man who believed love alone could not fill an empty stomach. Pride, like a quiet fire, burned within him. He wanted more not just for himself, but for Zola. He wanted a life where she would never have to count coins or hide her hunger behind a smile. So when the call for soldiers came, Nkosi answered. "I will return," he told Zola the night before he left, his voice firm, though his heart trembled. "And when I do, I will bring back a better life for us." Zola held on to him as though the wind itself might steal him away. "Come back to me," she whispered. "That is all I ask." The years that followed were not kind. War does not remember the names of men, nor does it care for the promises they leave behind. Nkosi marched through lands that were not his own, saw things no man should see, and carried the weight of survival like a burden on his back. Yet in every quiet moment, when the guns fell silent and the night stretched long, his thoughts returned to Zola. He imagined her waiting by the doorway. He imagined her smile. It was that image that kept him alive. But back in the village, Zola faced a different kind of battle. With Nkosi gone, the small income that once sustained them disappeared. The fields grew harder to tend alone, and the market no longer welcomed her with kindness. Whispers followed her, soft at first, then louder. Will he even return? Some would say. And if he does, what will he bring? Others mocked. Among those who watched her closely was Mama Thandiwe, Nkosi's mother. A woman hardened by years and sharpened by disappointment. "She was never strong enough for my son," Mama Thandiwe would mutter. "A woman who depends on a man will fall when he is gone." Her eyes followed Zola like a shadow. Then one day, a new presence entered the story. A man named Bekizizwe Dlamini. He arrived not like a storm, but like a quiet rain, unexpected, yet impossible to ignore. Wealth clung to him in the way he dressed, in the way he spoke, and in the way others lowered their voices when he passed. At first, his kindness seemed innocent. He brought food when Zola had none. He offered money when her needs grew too great. He spoke gently, never demanding, never rushing. "You should not suffer like this," Bekizizwe told her one afternoon as he stood by the doorway. "Nkosi once crossed every day. No woman should carry such burdens alone." Zola hesitated, her pride warring with her desperation. "I will repay you," she said quietly. Bekizizwe smiled, but there was something in that smile the wind did not trust. "We will speak of repayment another time." And so a seed was planted, not of love, but of doubt. For in every village, there comes a moment when kindness wears the face of something else, and only time reveals its true name. They say when hunger knocks at the door, even the strongest heart begins to tremble. At first, the visits of Bekizizwe Dlamini were quiet, almost invisible, like a shadow that moved with the sun. He would arrive in the early hours of the morning, or just before dusk, when the village was busy enough not to notice yet still watchful enough to whisper. He brought maize. He brought medicine. He brought things Zola could no longer afford to ask for. And each time he came, Zola felt the weight of her choices press harder against her chest. "I do not want people to talk," she said one evening, standing at the threshold of her home, her voice low but firm. Bekizizwe leaned against the wooden frame, his eyes calm, almost too calm. "People will always talk," he replied. "Even when there is nothing to say, they will still find words." Zola looked away, her fingers tightening around the cloth she held. "My husband will return." There was a pause. "Will he?" Bekizizwe asked gently, not with cruelty, but with a quiet doubt that lingered in the air long after the words were spoken. That question, it did not belong to him alone. It had already begun to live in the village. Women at the well exchanged glances when Zola approached. Men at the market spoke in half-sentences, stopping just before truth could take shape. Children repeated what they heard without understanding its meaning. And above them, all like a voice carried by the wind, stood Mama Tandiwe. "She waits for a ghost," she would say loud enough for others to hear. "A man who has not returned in years is a man who is no longer among the living." But Mama Tandiwe did not stop at whispers. She wrote letters. Letters filled with suspicion, dipped in bitterness, and carried across distance to where Nkosi still fought to survive. "Your wife is not alone," she wrote. "A wealthy man walks freely into your home. The village has seen what a wife should never allow." Those words traveled far, and when they reached Nkosi, they did not fall gently. They struck like stones. In the cold silence of a soldier's camp, Nkosi read those letters again and again, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Doubt. "Zola would never betray me," he said to himself. But doubt is a patient enemy. It does not shout, it whispers, and each whisper grew louder than the last. Back in the village, Zola carried a burden no one truly understood. Behind closed doors, away from judging eyes, she sat beside a small sleeping mat, her hand resting gently on the fragile chest of a child whose breath was uneven, a child whose life hung by a thread thinner than hope. "Stay with me," she whispered softly, her voice breaking. "Your father will come back. He must." The child stirred weakly. Zola's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. She had no time for sorrow. Not when every day was a race against something she could not see, yet could feel creeping closer. And Bekizizwe knew. He had seen the child. He had heard the quiet cries in the night. He understood the desperation that lived behind Zola's eyes. But his kindness was not without weight. "Zola," he said one afternoon, his tone softer than before. "There are ways to ease your burden, if you allow it." She stiffened. "I have allowed enough." Bekizizwe stepped closer, his voice lowering. "A woman alone must make choices. The world does not reward loyalty to a man who may never return." Zola's eyes flashed not with fear, but with something stronger. "Then let the world watch me choose," she said firmly. "Because I will not betray my husband, not for money, not for comfort, not for anything." For a moment, Bekizizwe said nothing. Then he smiled. But this time the smile carried something deeper, something hidden. "Very well," he said quietly. "We shall see how long strength can endure hunger and time." And so the seed of doubt grew roots, not only in Nkosi's heart far away, but in the very ground beneath Zola's feet. They say the night reveals what the day dares to hide. The moon hung low over the village, casting long shadows across the dusty paths as Nkosi walked silently toward the home he had not seen in years. His boots were worn, his body tired, but his heart raced like a drum in a festival. He had returned, not with songs or celebration, not with drums announcing his arrival, but quietly like a man who wished to surprise the one he loved. "I will see her face before she sees mine," he whispered to himself, a faint smile touching his lips. The village had changed little. The same trees stood watch. The same wind carried familiar scents. Yet, something felt different, something Nkosi could not name. As he approached his compound, he slowed. The door was slightly open. A flicker of light danced inside. Nkosi's chest tightened, not with fear but with anticipation. "Zola," he murmured under his breath. But then he heard voices. A man's voice, low, calm, unfamiliar. Nkosi froze. His heartbeat quickened each thud louder than the last. He stepped closer, his breath shallow, now his senses sharpened by something darker than curiosity. The voices came from the bedroom. He moved quietly, each step heavy with suspicion. And then he saw. Through the half-open door in the dim glow of a lantern stood Zola. And beside her stood Bekizizwe, Dlamini, close. Too close, Nkosi's world shattered without a sound. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The air thickened, the walls closed in. The image before him burned into his eyes, refusing to be undone. Zola turned slightly, her face caught in the flicker of light. And in that instant, their eyes met. "Nkosi." She breathed her voice, breaking into disbelief. But Nkosi did not hear the love in her voice. He heard only betrayal. "You," he said, his voice low and trembling. "You bring another man into my home." Zola stepped forward quickly, her hands raised as if to hold back the storm she saw rising in him. "Nkosi, listen to me. This is not what you think. But anger does not wait for understanding." Nkosi's face hardened, his eyes dark with pain. "I have walked through death to return to you," he said, his voice rising. "And this is what I find." Bekizizwe remained still, watching his expression unreadable. Zola shook her head desperately. "Please, Nkosi, you must hear me. There is something you don't know I know enough." Nkosi thundered, his voice echoing through the small house. "The whole village was right. My own mother was right." The words struck Zola like a blow. Tears filled her eyes, but she stood her ground. "Your mother does not know the truth, and neither do I, it seems." Nkosi shot back bitterly. There was a silence then, heavy, suffocating. Zola's voice softened, trembling with urgency. "Nkosi, everything I have done, I did for you, for us." But Nkosi's pride had already taken root. It wrapped around his heart, tightening with every breath. "For us," he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. "Is this what you call loyalty?" He turned away, unable or unwilling to see the desperation in her eyes. "Nkosi, please," Zola cried, reaching out. "Do not walk away like this." But he did. Without another word, without another glance, Nkosi stepped out into the night. The same night that had welcomed him home, now swallowed him whole. Behind him, Zola collapsed to her knees, her sobs breaking the silence he left behind. And in the shadows, Bekizizwe watched quietly. For in every story told beneath the African sky, there comes a moment when truth stands at the door, but pride refuses to let it in. They say truth is like the sun, no matter how long it hides behind the clouds, it will one day rise. The night Nkosi walked away, the village did not sleep. Whispers moved faster than the wind. "Did you hear?" He returned and found her with another man. It is just as Mama Tandiwe said. By morning, the story had grown sharper, heavier, and far more cruel than the truth it replaced. But inside the small house, Nkosi had abandoned a very different story, struggled to breathe. Zola sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her eyes hollow from a night without rest. In her arms lay a small boy, fragile, silent, his tiny chest rising unevenly as if each breath was a battle. "My child," she whispered, pressing her forehead gently against his. "Your father has returned, but he does not see us." The boy stared faintly. This was the truth no one had cared to ask about. The truth Zola had carried alone. Months after Nkosi left for war, Zola had discovered she was with child. At first, joy filled her heart. It was a piece of Nkosi that remained with her, a promise that he would never truly be gone. But joy, as the elders say, does not always travel alone. The child was born weak. His cries were soft. His body often burned with fever. Some nights Zola sat awake, watching his chest rise and fall, afraid that if she closed her eyes, she would wake to silence. The village had no answers. The healers tried herbs. The elders offered prayers. But nothing was enough. That was when Bekizizwe Dlamini entered her life, not as a lover, but as a lifeline. I know doctors in the city, he had told her. People who can help your child. Zola had hesitated. Why would you help me, she asked. Bekizizwe had looked at her for a long moment before answering. Because suffering should not be faced alone. At the time, his words had sounded like kindness. And perhaps in part they were. He paid for medicine. He arranged visits to a distant clinic. He made sure there was always food in the house. But help, as the wise say, is rarely free. You cannot continue like this forever, Bekizizwe said one evening as he stood near the sleeping child. A woman in your position needs stability. Zola understood what he meant, but she refused to accept it. I am not alone, she said quietly. My husband lives. Bekizizwe's gaze softened, but there was something firm beneath it. The world believes he does not. I do not belong to the world, Zola replied. I belong to him. Still, she accepted his help not for herself, but for the child. To protect her dignity, she agreed to work for him, cleaning, organizing, assisting with small tasks whenever he visited the village. She kept her distance, her boundaries clear, her loyalty unshaken. But the village did not see that. They saw only a wealthy man entering her home. They saw only what they wanted to believe. And so the truth became buried beneath layers of assumption. Back in the present, as the morning sun crept through the cracks in the wall, Zola held her son tighter. Footsteps approached outside. It was Mama Tandiwe. She entered without knocking, her eyes sharp as ever. So she said coldly, looking down at Zola, the truth has finally revealed itself. Zola did not respond. What you have done has brought shame to my son, Mama, Tandiwe continued. And now the whole village sees it. Zola lifted her gaze, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. You see only what you want to see. Mama Tandiwe scoffed. And what should I see? A faithful wife. A woman who welcomes another man into her bed. Zola's grip tightened around her child. You should see a mother, she said quietly. A mother who has fought alone to keep her child alive. For a moment, there was silence. But silence does not always mean understanding. Mama Tandiwe turned away unmoved. Excuses do not erase disgrace. She walked out, leaving behind words that hung heavier than truth itself. Zola closed her eyes. Outside the village continued its whispers. And somewhere in that same village, Nkosi carried a heart full of anger, blind to the truth that stood closer to him than he could ever imagine. For in every story shaped by pain, there comes a moment when truth cries out, but only those who listen with humility can truly hear it. They say pride is a drum that beats so loudly it drowns out the voice of truth. By midday, the entire village had gathered beneath the great baobab tree, the place where disputes were settled, where truths were spoken, and where reputations were broken. At the center stood Nkosi. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a fire that had not yet found peace. Around him, the villagers murmured their curiosity, fed by rumor, their judgment sharpened by spectacle. This matter must be addressed. Nkosi declared, his voice strong, but edged with bitterness. I will not carry shame in silence. From the edge of the crowd, Mama Tandiwe nodded with approval, her lips pressed into a thin, satisfied line. Call her, Nkosi said. Moments later, Zola appeared. She walked slowly, her steps careful, her arms cradling the small child against her chest. Her face bore the marks of sleepless nights, but her posture remained upright. She did not lower her gaze, not out of defiance, but out of dignity. The murmurs grew louder. She dares to show her face. And with a child, Nkosi looked at her, and for a fleeting second, something in his eyes softened. But pride is quick to close the door that love tries to open. Tell them, Nkosi said coldly, gesturing toward the crowd. Tell them why another man stands in my place. Zola's voice came out calm, though her heart trembled. Nkosi, this is not the place. It is exactly the place, he interrupted sharply. If you can betray me in my own home, then you can speak your truth before my people. A heavy silence followed. Zola looked around, the eyes of the village fixed upon her, waiting, judging. Then she spoke. This child, she began, her voice soft but steady, is yours. The words rippled through the crowd like a sudden storm. Nkosi laughed, a short, bitter sound. Mine, he repeated. Do you expect me to believe that after everything I have seen? Zola stepped forward, slightly holding the child closer. You left before you knew. I carried him alone. I gave birth alone. I have raised him alone. Alone, Nkosi snapped. With the help of another man, her eyes flashed with pain. With the help of someone who gave what the world refused to give, a chance for him to live. Nkosi shook his head, his pride refusing to yield. You think you can weave stories and expect me to forget what I saw? At that moment, the child stirred weakly, a faint cry escaping his lips. The sound cut through the noise like a blade. Zola looked down, her face softening instantly. It's all right. I'm here, she whispered, gently rocking him. For a brief moment, even the villagers fell silent. But Nkosi turned away. I do not recognize that child, he said firmly. And I do not recognize the woman who stands before me. The words struck harder than any blow. Zola's breath caught, but she did not break. You do not recognize me, she said quietly, because you no longer see with your heart. Mama Thandiwe stepped forward, then her voice sharp. Enough of this. The boy has brought dishonor upon himself by choosing a wife who could not remain faithful. Zola lifted her head, meeting the older woman's gaze. No, Mama. Your son has brought dishonor upon himself by choosing pride over truth. Gasps spread through the crowd. Nkosi's eyes darkened. Watch your words. I have watched my words for too long, Zola replied, her voice rising for the first time. I have endured whispers, hunger, loneliness, and still remained faithful to you. But today you choose to believe lies over the life we built together. Her voice cracked, but her strength did not. Nkosi felt something shift within him, a flicker, a doubt. But pride is a stubborn master. He clenched his fists, forcing the feeling away. Then leave, he said coldly. Take your lies and your child with you. The crowd gasped again. Zola stood still for a moment. Then slowly she nodded. Very well, she said softly. But remember this day, Nkosi. Remember the moment you chose blindness over truth. She turned and walked away. The child's faint breathing echoed in the silence she left behind, and Nkosi stood alone in the center of the crowd, surrounded by people, yet further from truth than ever before. For in every story carried by the wind, there comes a moment when pride stands tall, only to cast a shadow so deep even love cannot be seen within it. They say when truth finally speaks, even the loudest pride must fall silent. The sun had begun its slow descent when a voice cut through the murmuring crowd, calm, steady, and impossible to ignore. Enough. All eyes turned. From the edge of the gathering stepped Bekizizwe Dlamini. He walked with the quiet authority of a man who feared no judgment, his presence alone enough to still the restless whispers. His gaze moved across the villagers, then settled on Nkosi, who stood rigid, his pride still wrapped tightly around him like armor. You speak of shame, Bekizizwe said, his voice measured. But today, the only shame I see belongs to a man who refuses to listen. Nkosi's jaw tightened. You have no right to speak in this matter. Bekizizwe stopped a few steps away from him. On the contrary, he replied, I have every right. A ripple of curiosity passed through the crowd. Nkosi stepped forward, anger rising again. You enter my home. You stand beside my wife. And now you dare to defend her. I do not defend lies, Bekizizwe said calmly. I reveal truth. Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to pause. What truth Nkosi demanded? Bekizizwe's eyes did not waver. The truth that you have chosen not to see. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the path where Zola had disappeared moments earlier. That woman you have cast aside has carried your name with more honor than you have carried your own. Nkosi scoffed, though the sound lacked its earlier strength. Words, nothing more. Then listen carefully, Bekizizwe said, his tone sharpening for the first time. I am the one who funded the supply lines for your battalion. The crowd stirred. Nkosi's expression flickered confusion, breaking through anger. I knew your name long before you returned, Bekizizwe continued. Nkosi, the soldier, who refused to abandon his men, even when retreat was the easier path. Nkosi stared at him. Then you knew I was alive. Yes, Bekizizwe said simply. The weight of that word settled heavily. Then why? Nkosi began, his voice faltering. Why did you allow them to believe I was dead? Bekizizwe held his gaze. Because I wanted to see what remained when hope was taken away. A murmur spread through the crowd. And what did you see? Nkosi asked, quieter now. I saw a woman, Bekizizwe said, who refused to break. He took a slow step forward. I offered her comfort, she refused. I offered her security, she refused. I offered her a life free from struggle, she refused. Each sentence struck Nkosi harder than the last. She chose you, Bekizizwe said firmly. Again and again. Even when the world told her you were gone. Even when hunger pressed against her door. Even when her child, he paused briefly. Your child needed more than she could give. Nkosi's breath caught. My child, he whispered. Before Bekizizwe could answer, a sudden cry echoed from the path. Weak, fragile, urgent, all heads turned. There in the distance, Zola stumbled forward, her steps unsteady, the child in her arms, barely moving. Help, she gasped. In an instant, everything changed. Nkosi moved without thinking. The pride that had once held him still now shattered like dry earth beneath rain. He reached her just as her knees gave way, catching her before she hit the ground. Zola, he called, his voice breaking. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with exhaustion and something deeper, fear. He's not breathing well, she whispered, her grip tightening weakly around the child. Nkosi looked down. For the first time, truly looked. The child's small chest rose unevenly, each breath a struggle. And in that moment, the truth no longer needed words. It lived. It breathed. It trembled in his hands. What do we do, Nkosi? Asked, his voice no longer proud, only desperate. Bekizizwe stepped forward, his expression grave. He needs surgery. Immediately. How much time? Nkosi asked. Bekizizwe met his eyes. Very little. The crowd fell silent. The weight of everything, truth, pride, love, and consequence, hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. And for the first time, since his return, Nkosi understood. Some mistakes do not wait for forgiveness. They demand action. For, in every story shaped by the choices of the heart, there comes a moment when truth arrives not as a whisper, but as a cry that cannot be ignored. They say a man who listens too late must learn to live with the echo of his own silence. The child's faint breathing filled the air like a fragile drumbeat, each rise of his chest uncertain, each fall a question no one dared to answer. In that moment, beneath the watching eyes of the village, Nkosi felt something within him break. Not the pride that had once made him strong, but the blindness that had made him cruel. Zola, he whispered, his voice trembling, forgive me. But forgiveness, as the elders say, is not a door that opens with a single knock. Zola lay weak in his arms, her strength nearly gone, her eyes heavy with both exhaustion and pain. Yet when she looked at him, there was no hatred, only the quiet weight of a heart that had endured more than words could carry. I asked you to listen, she said softly. But you chose to hear only your anger. Nkosi lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. Around them, the village stood silent, no longer whispering, no longer judging, only watching the truth unfold. I was wrong, Nkosi said, his voice breaking under the weight of his own realization. I allowed pride to speak louder than love. I allowed doubt to blind me to what mattered most. The child let out a weak cry. That sound was enough. We must go, Nkosi said urgently, looking up at Bekizizwe Dlamini. Tell me what to do. I will do anything. For the first time since the beginning of the conflict, Bekizizwe's expression softened not with superiority, but with something closer to understanding. There is a clinic in the city, he said. The doctors are ready. I had already arranged it, in case this moment came. Nkosi blinked in surprise. You planned this. I hoped it would not be necessary. Bekizizwe replied quietly. But I have learned that life does not wait for men to correct their mistakes. Without hesitation, Nkosi lifted the child carefully, holding him as though he carried both life and consequence in his arms. Zola, stay with me, he said, his voice filled with urgency and remorse. We will save him. I swear it. Zola nodded faintly. And so as the sun dipped below the horizon, they left the village together, no longer divided by suspicion, but bound by a truth that had nearly come too late. Days passed like years. At the clinic, machines hummed softly and strangers in white coats moved with purpose. Nkosi sat beside the bed, his eyes never leaving his son. He spoke softly to him, as if trying to make up for every moment he had lost. I did not see you, he whispered, but I see you now, and I will not turn away again. Zola rested nearby, her strength slowly returning. Though her heart still carried scars, words could not heal overnight. And Bekizizwe, he remained. He paid for everything, the treatment, the medicine, the care, not out of desire, not out of control, but out of something far rarer, accountability. I crossed a line, he admitted one evening standing beside Nkosi. I tested a woman who deserved respect. For that I will spend the rest of my life making amends. Nkosi looked at him no longer with anger, but with understanding shaped by pain. We all crossed lines, Nkosi said quietly. Some of us just did not see them in time. The day the child opened his eyes fully, the room filled with a silence more powerful than any celebration. He lived. Zola wept. Nkosi fell to his knees, overwhelmed not just with relief, but with gratitude. And in that moment, beneath the quiet light of hope, a family was rebuilt, not on pride but on truth. They say in every village, there is a story told to remind the living how to see. This is one of them. For pride may stand tall, but it cannot see beyond itself, and love when tested does not shout it waits. So listen before you judge. Seek truth before you condemn. And remember, what the eyes see is not always what the heart knows. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, where are you watching from?